He has to come for it. Okay, out there.
So today we have a bit of a classic match. It's Looi and Neil Ernest. It's from the Impact UK Open in 2004. Referee will be familiar to a lot of us as well, Master Annika Andriesch. And, what a great tournament that used to be. It's a shame that one's gone. But, really, really big high-level tournaments. I actually don't know, was this the final of the 70 kilo category or was it the grand champion part of it? But I think the final of the 70s. So nice one to pick for a classic match and a little bit of an analysis of some sparring from a slightly different rule set and a slightly different era, and to have a look at how things have changed.
Yeah, the styles are definitely different for sure. You see lots of stance switches and things like that, and spinning takes up a lot of the action, I think, compared to what it does now. So yeah, it'll be interesting, especially considering that Hong is still competing up until last year pretty much. So it'll be interesting to have a look. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's jump into that, and we'll male 71 kilos. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that'll tell you how quickly you move with the times. Categories have changed a little bit as well. So let's get this one underway.
So I suppose you can see straight off that there's a little changes to what we're used to. So the stance is slightly different. So kind of gives you the idea that maybe hands are favoured a little more, maybe.
Yeah, you see, especially in the front foot. The front foot is definitely far more of an open position. It's not set for the side kick.
Yeah.
And you get a nice kind of the step that Neil makes here. To have that size of a distance that you can make a step in like that and not be caught on the step. Hong can hold his ground there and just wait for the step to fully finish, and then he goes to hand. So there's a full stance of a step in, and then pretty much just onto range for Hong. Which, I just don't think you'd see that space play out very often unless you have a big mismatch. If you had a very tall fighter against a shorter fighter, okay, we'll be at longer ranges. But
but that range is quite big, and you can see that that's probably why there's lots of steps and spins needed to kind of close that distance,
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of feinting going on, and
the testing's at very, very long range. So if you're thinking about what reaction that you're looking to get, it's quite different, isn't it? So just jumping back to look at this, the kind of feints that we're looking at here wouldn't take you into they're just about taking you into what we consider to be normal range now. So,
and even if you just go back to the start of that as well, the range is actually bigger than you think, because look at the length of Hong's stance. The distance between them is actually more than what you think.
That's it. And even to have that much, movement without any particular, there's no drawing, is it? There isn't that much that's actually going on by way of reaction to it. For Neil to not be, for Neil to still feel like I'm still out of range here. The distance is quite big. That was a nice angle though from Hong, wasn't it? Just that little bit of being outside of the front kick.
Yeah, and I think that might be like the second or third time Neil tried that front kick, and Hong was able to get a nice angle on that as well.
Yeah,
I think it was the third time he tried that one, and it was he was ready. He was kind of able to get that nice angle.
And often you'll see Hong go to the right hand side when he wants to go to hands, but for a counter attacking, he's happy out there to be on the left.
Great angle. And this is kind of the side kick there is not really one that we would see, to be honest, like we would now.
Yeah, that little exchange there now with the turning kick against the turning kick, the interplay with the back kick again, it's something that we don't see as much. You'd expect a straight shot to come up there more often. That it's kind of there's a tease. Yeah. So even the jumping punch that Neil has kind of shown there, like again, you don't see that jumping punch being tried very often, but like
no.
Obviously the return isn't as high. I think at this stage we're probably still. I'm not actually sure that they still had 2 points for the jumping punch. Probably not.
Probably not. 2004.
It's probably a year or two out at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
But
obviously it's in his style though, and because
exactly.
of it being a good technique for a long time. Yeah, there's the front kick again, but this time it lands.
There he gets the return on it.
Yeah.
So I think that's...
And the distance allows for that as well. That's one thing that, because of the distance being so long, that it kind of allows it,
And what you've got there in terms of that front kick is that ability to cut off the direct counter. So, you're going to bring in that knee really quite quickly and get yourself onto that position where anyone stepping forward is meeting the knee, even if the leg doesn't extend.
Yeah.
So,
he definitely picked up he learned the lesson from the one before it where the angle was taken by Hong.
Yeah.
I think because he went straight through there and noticed that maybe the body position was slightly different, but a clear score, like if you can land that, like, so clear.
I remember Maciej at some point in the past there, and Neil would have done a lot of training with Maciej, like really felt, this is a shot that can like get clear scores, as you said, But again, that's if you're taking away the side kick, which you kind of do once you change your stance, that then becomes a very viable option.
And I think the distance too is something that allows for that, because I think the distance these days might be a little bit closer. So I think that you'd easily get cut off with that back kick once you step off that back leg.
I think you have to create movement. Just going straight from the back leg, I think, is something that most fighters at this stage would just balk against as an idea, because you've got so much direct front leg counter to that you really are taking a risk to go from a distance with that back leg. You can get purchase on at that time.
Yeah, you see there's probably step in there as well, so it kind of makes it easier to counter that.
Yeah.
Something interesting here as well is I think that this is a time before the scoreboard, so I think that the warnings weren't actually in the mind of them so much, that
you
they
can
were
definitely
looking
see it in some of their changes in ring position, like they're like the willingness to give up
take a
space
warning,
and to flirt with the edge of the ring as such. Definitely. You can see the nod of the head. They're liking the back kick.
But it's interesting there because, like, if we were at a 324 there, just back of it, or around there.
Yeah, no worries.
Like, trying to see that there was a middle kick from Hong, but Neil tried to counter it by coming under a middle kick, which is something that you usually wouldn't see, because obviously there's not much space there and you got to come under it. I think,
return.
Exactly. So like it just shows how much the spinning was kind of valued back then, I think.
I think as well, in terms of what you're saying there, it's like the attempt is there. I think if we look at the way the front arm moves, the intent is there a little bit just to take the leg out of the way. If you look at Hong's one here, there's the glove kind of goes out to the foot. It's around it just a little, but I think it's the difference in terms of how that side kick is prepared as well. That the option is there to even try that.
Yeah,
It's going back to the well. It's worked a couple of times. I like this. I'll go back for another one. The distance is so long. Wow, it's just so long.
A big step on that as well because of the distance, obviously. So maybe that's why the side kick wasn't favoured back then, because of that distance, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it could be quite a bit easier to do something with it. I think, nice shot. I actually went ahead one there. I wanted to jump back just a little bit to this one where Hong steps in, as you were saying, like that step from Neil, like any closer. If that shot's actually been taken from closer, then Hong's going to get the shoulder against that and come through. But that extreme long range actually takes away some shots. Like there's a few things that you can't throw and sometimes we see that where someone will bring the distance long and then they'll do a double step or a foot to foot. And if you're fat, you'll get away with it because now the distance is wrong for the counter. So there can be a little bit of a lesson, I think, in terms of how to use that longer range sometimes to your advantage. a real
Yeah, you wouldn't
push
really
and
see
pull.
that switch turning kick too often there, would you?
No, and
These days, anyway.
I mean, it's a lovely shot. You know, it's a push pull thing. Like, you know, I mean, from Neil's perspective, is it, you know, is it inviting something? You know, he's here. There's the opening. You know, you're really offering a lot more. I think for both guys, their attacks are offering opportunities for counterattacks, but equally, rather than just feinting to draw a reaction, they're almost going much deeper into it. They're throwing more of the full shot to draw the reaction and trusting that, well, if I get a reaction to this distance is long. I'm going to have time to recover my rhythm, and away I go again. I can counterattack it. So it changes a lot of the thinking. Once you start at that longer distance, you have to throw much further into your shot to draw a reaction. So really, it's more like throwing a combination.
Yeah, with the intention of maybe scoring that second, third, or fourth one. Yeah.
I mean, to be able to take a big step in and still be a mat away is something else.
Yeah, the ring management, like we talked about earlier, I think that's something that, you know, they're easily giving up space and not really thinking about it. And I really do think that's because of the scoreboard. And I think since the scoreboards have come in, people are more conscious of the impact warnings have and ring space as well, you know.
But even like from here, like that Hong would let Neil walk from the corner. So like he starts in the next shot, like after this exchange, he finds himself in the corner of the ring. So like from here, and as you see, then Hong lets him walk with absolutely no interruption right back onto the middle mat. I mean, I can't fathom that happening now. You know, I mean, it's talking about the same guy, like, and it's not like Hong was unsuccessful at the time. You know, these are really good competitors, like top level, you know, with some great shots. But the ring management just wasn't as much of a factor.
Definitely.
And 3-1 still, you know, was going to cause a point deduction.
Yeah. No, I think that the shot selection was a bit different as well. Was that 2 to 6?
Yeah, so 2 for Hong, 6 for Neil. And you know, it's very hard to tell. We've no scoreboard, but in a match like that, how big an impact is that? The 2 minus points. So Neil starting.
It was a close enough match as well. To be fair, like it wasn't
a lot of the exchanges were close.
Scoring, yeah. So I would imagine that would have made an impact. Definitely.
It's entirely possible that those 2 minus points were the difference in the match there. You know, that was probably given a bit of a giveaway. But but you know, it's one of those things that, you know, when you talk about whether it matters or not to have the scoreboard or how does it affect it, like the two guys are still sparring in very much the same vein from start to finish. It's not like they change their characteristics much throughout the match. There's a few moments where Hong lifts it and that's just, I think, more of a comparison between the styles of the fighters, that, you know, sometimes Neil is point stop. He's getting clear scores, really tidy scores. Think of that front kick or the counter turning kick. You know, they can be quite clear scores, but they're in singles. And then moving off and pulling again. Where Hong, there's 4 or 5 times where he gets a touch. He gets just a hint of an opening, and he throws himself through that opening no matter what. You know, it's put the body on the line, get in there, throw everything into it. And that continuation usually lets him build up a couple of points, but they're not necessarily as clear as what Neil was grabbing.
Yeah, I think as well as something interesting to note is the most of the time, if somebody leads with a kick, they use the other leg straight away rather than in the kind of like the modern sparring. You can see there's a lot more building of like continuous shots on the same leg. Whereas I noticed like every time there was a kick thrown, it was like right leg, left leg, right leg, left leg. Almost every time there was no doubling up on one leg to go to another leg or anything like that. It was literally always opposite. So that definitely is something that you wouldn't see as much of today, maybe.
And I think the kind of combination that leads to, like, today you might be more inclined to see hands follow legs, where there you were tending to see the right following the left or the left following the right before anything happened with hands. And I think that's you know, is when you go back to it, the stance, you know, is a contributor to that. You know, that both guys have longer than what we would think is kind of conventional for fighters nowadays. Like most people we would find would be a little more side facing, a little shorter in their stance, a little taller in their stance, and they would tend to spar closer.
Yeah, like we talked about with Dominic, the biomechanics of a side kick. We talked about yesterday, and he was saying as well. We mentioned about the distance of the stance. The longer the stance, the harder it is to push off at that side kick. So obviously that had an impact on the shot selection as well, and the type of techniques that people favoured back then. But then you wonder, does that all come back to the purchase that people were maybe getting from hands? But again, without scoreboards, how would you know really? You know, it's a tricky one.
We see this is the other thing. Like if you don't know what shots are actually getting a return, if you don't know what's scoring, well then you'll maybe select what feels good. You know, and you know, this is the thing. Like when we look back into like previous generations, we can only assume from our spectators' viewpoint that that lovely back kick combination scored. I mean, maybe only one referee gave it and it had no impact on the match whatsoever. Whereas, you know, once you put a scoreboard out there and you look at, oh, see that side kick? That was 2 points on 2 cards. Cool. We know what that did. We even know now as we watch it that, you know, if you score your side kick going forward from the middle of the ring, you're more likely to get 3 judges on it. Whereas if you score a defensive side kick retreating in a corner, you might just about get 1. So we know that ring position also impacts the value of a score. So in the competitive sense, like, okay, not from the point of view of teaching skills as a coach, but from a competitive sense in terms of teaching efficiency as a competitive coach, you want to go to the shots that get you the most return most of the time. And you want to build craft around that in terms of ring position to where you're going to be in a position to get value on your scores. And if you're not doing that, then, well, you could be doing a lot of work for a very little return. And
that kind of brings you to the idea as well of kind of considering why spinning was so dominant. Because to me anyway, there was no clear shots landed from spinning techniques, but they seem to be very like spinning dominant, we call it, I suppose. And it was definitely featured a lot. And you can see, and it's strange as well, because of that distance that we talked about already, you need to kind of like spin into that distance to get it, which is quite risky as well, you know.
We even saw Hong at one point take a 360 step. So I think he was right leg in front. He or maybe the other way around, but he's spinning, he's putting his other leg in the front with no reaction to then go to hands. And it's like, that's a huge distance to be able to take and then to still have to go further to go to hands. But as you said, as a function of the stance that you're in and the distance that you have, like you can use a spin to set something up. You can use the spin as a fake to then bring you into hands or to go forward. And just having a standard distance that's different, that's longer, means then maybe a foot to foot isn't as risky. You know, maybe a step in before you lift your front foot isn't as risky at all. But I think that's really interesting because then, like the question you come back to, and again, we're looking at just 2 fighters and, you know, a comparison of 2 people's styles, but that has to be, or it has to be considered, is that like an unspoken agreement? Like, you know, if you were to take, for example, a modern day light contact kickboxer and put them in that ring. You know, you take one of those guys, you put them in the Irish Open kickboxing or something, you put them in that ring and you ask them to, okay, let's spar. And the other person just doesn't know about this unspoken agreement. And they just go, no, I'm going to stand 8 inches from you and keep stepping in. Like, what changes? And like, that's do we have currently an unspoken agreement that sparring is going to happen within a mat distance? You know, and what happens then when someone decides, nah, I'm going to spar longer? Come at me. And I think that brings up that novelty of, well, oh, how does that change it? Or someone who decides, yeah, I know we're within a mat, but I'd still like to be closer. And, you know, they want to bring it in a little bit. And you get people into that uncomfortable position where you start twitching, you start to flinch a little bit, you start to, you know, and you don't see that from either of these guys the whole match. Both of them look, because neither of them really can be 100% sure if they're winning or losing. Like Hong is I would say, pleasantly surprised, or at least, happy to discover the result at the end of that match. I don't think he could have gone in there saying, yeah, I'm definitely going to win this. I think he's waiting for the referee to raise the hand. And so they both spar the whole way through in almost the same like mental state. They're engaged in a match that's toing and froing, but it's not like, there's no definitively I'm in the lead, I'm behind. And so
they're quite in the moment all the time. Exactly. Yeah,
it's very relaxed, it's very flowy. They're letting the shots flow, and there doesn't seem to be any of that tension of awareness of the game state. And I think when you're aware of the game state and there are 20 seconds left on that clock and I'm losing and I need to get 2 points, well, that changes how you go, and it opens up opportunities for both people because we're aware. And
I think that actually is one of the reasons why the shots that we see now is slightly different as well. Not completely the main reason, but it contributes to it, because if you think about it, the way that people were like flowing naturally and spinning, and they were looking for that, as we said earlier, they weren't really sure of the return or the consequences that had. But now people are a little bit more cagey, and they don't want to give anything away, because it's very obvious now on the scoreboard if you're ahead or you're behind. So I think that, as you mentioned there, like with the whole flow of it, is something that contributes to that.
I mean, a very interesting thing even from that is, and again, it's probably another factor of the distance, the number of attempted head kicks from two guys who were well able to kick to the head, very, very low. Like you have a couple of Hail Mary downward kicks, like as a follow-on to a combination from Hong, and you have the one turning kick from Neil that as Hong kind of steps to his left and Neil catches him, or catches the glove, but it's like it's a head-high turning kick and he's kind of walking into it. Like that, I would think if you were to look at, let's take some of the modern 70 fighters, like you take Adam Shelley, Kamil Dobrovolsky, Hare, you start layering those guys in there, and you look at the shots they're throwing, you're going to have to deal with headshots, the threat of headshots.
I think it's something that impacts that, as well as the idea of carrying your leg with you. Like a lot of these guys, they were kicking to kick rather than carrying kicks to score at the end of the combination, we say, or at the end of that single shot. I think that something is, in terms of like just being able to bring your leg with you for a second to shoot for that shot, and as well the front leg isn't really used as kind of like that fencing style that we see now, maybe, and just like as a jab, maybe. I think that maybe that front leg was used maybe to just get you into that distance first, and that was like an initiator to set everything else up. Exactly, yeah.
I think it's very interesting to see how the style has evolved over time. So I think the real question for us is then like, okay, how often it just happens all the time. You look to something that was in favor, 10, 20 years ago, and it'll come back around. It's going to find utility again. And if you went back a couple of years before this, this is 2004. If we went back into the late 90s, or even if you take 2004 and you go to Germany and you have a look at like Grandmaster Land's students, sidekick is definitely still in favor. Like I remember looking at guys, pretty much standing in like a backwards L stance. So the back foot is pointing out of the ring, and the front foot is sideways, and you're leaning back. And, that was the stance, and we're going to spar there. And like, this is happening at the same time, that you have such disparate styles that's happening at the same time. But from what the two guys have displayed there, like what kind of things would you be potentially looking to take and say, look, maybe that gives us something to try over the next 6 to 12 months, to kind of shake up the current meta, the current normal.
Yeah. I think there were some nice things that you could definitely look at. Just that whole idea of trying to draw shots a little more actively, I think, is a good one, because we see now that anyone who may have like a traditional counter style, they're kind of sitting back a little bit and they're waiting for something to happen to counter off. But I think that gives the person who's initiating a massive advantage. So I really like the way the guys were kind of like being proactive in setting up their own counters. Like you see, they would offer a shot with real conviction that was like if you didn't bite on it or react, you could have still got hit with that shot, you know.
Yeah.
And so I really like that aspect of it, like of actually being real proactive with your techniques to make something happen rather
Yeah.
than waiting and stalling as such, you know.
I think that's definitely one thing worth trying. I think as well, just as a concept, like encouraging competitors or like our students to play at different distances and to see whether it makes them or their opponent more uncomfortable. Like,
and
you
you know
get
what
that
is
with
is
tempo,
very
but yeah,
what I was going to say on that is what's very important with that as well is that if you can practice at a distance that's not set, we say, as the norm,
yeah,
and then you get comfortable in that and training over time, and you can bring that to somebody, they're going to be very, very uncomfortable where you're going to be more comfortable in that from practicing it. So you kind of have a massive advantage there, and I think whoever is able to do that and be effective with it early on, it will begin to change the game, we say, and maybe we'll see some more play with that.
I think over the last while we've been more kind of focusing on making it uncomfortably close, you know, and spending a lot of time like looking for moments in the match where a person might want to increase the distance and get some comfort out of that, and being, you know, present of mind enough to say, okay, you're looking to change the distance and make it longer. Okay, let's see if I can make you uncomfortable by making it shorter. But the same thing can happen in terms of lengthening the distance as well. And, you know, as counterintuitive as it seems to, you know, to be, to like let somebody out, you know, it's also an invitation that you can, you know, can someone who's been backed into a corner on 2 warnings refuse the invitation to come out if you back up a stance? And then coming out, like, are they going to come out behind a suitable defense? Like, are they going to come out cagey enough? Or do they just naturally react to, God, I need to get that space? Are they going to follow you and give you the opportunity to take that headshot because they're stepping into it? So again, that play around the longer distance opens up completely different shots.
But I think that goes hand in hand with what we just said, that for you to play at that distance, you need to be proactive in closing that distance.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to be a game of cat and mouse of just wait. Who's going to take a risk first?
Yes.
And I think we kind of seen that at the early stages of this match as well, where there was a lot of playing around with footwork and steps and things. And then eventually Hong kind of takes a little bit of a risk. So if you have 2 guys who are conservative, we say, you could see that type of style really being boring and not really entertaining for people who are watching, if they're not willing to take those risks and to be proactive, we say. Because if somebody decides to give up space and the other person doesn't accept that invitation, I think that makes for an ugly match, really, you know.
I think one other thing though is definitely the use of the back leg, because okay, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's going to be as I wouldn't necessarily want all my competitors throwing a spin into
as direct, like
movement as direct as that.
Yeah.
But what I do mean is you often see people chasing with the front leg, and you know, this futile chase towards the end of it, where you know you're trying to carry the front leg to where the person's going, and they're able to draw you, change direction, etc. Where when you can just say, okay, well, the front leg is to get you moving and the back leg is to get the score. Like, so particularly in like when you're chasing a score, or when the person is trying to defend a lead by, you know, avoiding at the end of a match, or even where, you know, you've physically imposed yourself on the match enough, the person is moving back off that front leg and looking to counter. That's where that back leg can come in if you have that sharp, whether it's the front kick like Neil had there, or the turning kick as Hong was thrown. You know, that back leg gives you something.
We've seen it at the end of that match, actually, where Neil pressed the action and Hong, he kind of steered Hong into his back leg.
Yeah,
and he came
exactly.
off the back leg with that turning kick then. Whereas if you can steer them the other way, maybe that sets up the spin off the other side or the hands or whatever. But yeah, I think like using that as almost like a setup, like you said, could be something that could be very, very effective if used right, especially considering now that people are more conscious of ring space and positioning.
Yes.
If you can squeeze that space and have someone towards the edge, you're really, really limiting their like what they can do as a result. So they might have no option, but not that they'll have no option, but you might by default actually steer them into that technique that you're looking for.
And I think that's also a bigger thing where like, and the space may be a factor of the ring size. So, you know, if you went into international competition back in the like late 90s and early 2000s, the official ring size for championships was 9x9.
Okay.
So we've come down from 9x9 to 8x8, you know, and with that, like 8x8 is 64 mats. We've also kind of got the, you know, the 100 mats, because you've got all the ones around it that you can have almost your whole stance in, as long as you can keep the pinky toe in the, you know, in the blue. But they've gone from 9x9, which is 81 mats. So, you know, there's a good chunk of change in the difference there. And in particular, as you go out to 11x11, you know, and how much you could have. You can have big space, which meant you could give up, you know, you could back away from attacks, make the distance long at will. You know, it was quite easy to do. Now, we're seeing a lot of the time, okay, we're in 8x8s, but in a lot of national tournaments and even some of the international ones that we go to, you're into a 7x7, you know, which means you're going from 64 mats to 49. You're going from that, you know, 100 mats on the floor that you can put your feet into onto 49. It's half. Or sorry, into, not 49, but into the 9x9, the 80. So there's 20 less mats for you to step in,
which is massive.
Which is massive. So when you think about how that affects things, you know, that's probably doing a certain amount of pushing fighters closer together as well, because and it's adding an imperative. I've got to steal a bit more space because there's now less space behind me to go into.
And there's a fine line between that as well, because if we spoke yesterday about rule changes and things like that, and the different combat sports, but the whole idea of, if you make it too small, kind of like light contact, then you're going to really, well, it's going not really, but hands are definitely going to become more prevalent, and you're going to see lots of more hand exchanges and closer contact, and that close range actually becomes a more active range, which at the moment I feel isn't really an active range in ITF sparring. So I think there's a fine line there between how you really want to go with the sport and where you want it to kind of shine. Do you want it to be more kicking dominant? Do you want it to be more action orientated, or what? So yeah, I think there's a fine line there, and you kind of need to be aware of. Right now, to be honest, I think there's a nice balance. It's not too big, not too small, to allow nice kicking actions, because, you know, as if you have a big guy there plus 85 who's attacking and shifting off the front leg, they might take up 2-3 mats in that, which is a big bit of space. So I think there's a nice little balance there at the moment to get enough action with the hands and nice kicking combinations as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something. And like I said, I love looking back at these older matches every now and again, or even the highlight reels, because, you know, you can see some shots and combinations that maybe you don't currently see. And I think that it's dangerous to only look at what's there right now, because what that does is, while you could say, look, oh, it's more efficient, you know, it's time well spent, you're looking at what's there now. It's also limiting your imagination as to what is possible and where do we go next. And, you know, again, it came up in a conversation yesterday, but the idea that, well, you know, if a country is successful and everyone decides to copy them, you'll only ever be 80 or 90% of what they're able to do. You're always going to be chasing it. They've got the head start. Whereas the one that's going to be successful next is the one who, by default, kind of figures out where the game is moving to and what's going to be successful in the new version of the game. And, you know, we've seen that over and over again through the generations of competition. And I think the solution is almost always some degree forward thinking and in the future. But to a big degree, it's in the past. It's what has worked before, and what's worked before will work again now.
The only thing that will impact that, I think, is rule changes. So like if the rules change, it sways it a little bit in a certain way, obviously. But it shows you, though, that, like, as it moves in cycles, it shows that other things are also effective. It just goes back to that thing that we've talked about so many times in the last 2 weeks of, there is no perfect technique. Anything that works. And even looking at that front kick from Neil Ernest, that's something that you would rarely see these days. But because of that, it could be effective because people aren't expecting it, and they're not ready, and they're not perceiving that potential threat. So because it's not, we say, in the current game, it means that it actually could be a current threat if somebody picks it up. So that's the beauty of it all, that it just takes somebody to get a little bit creative and to just think outside the box.
Yeah.
And it just sparks off a whole new change, I think.
Because certainly the same shot probably won't be thrown in the same way to be effective now, but it'll have its own niche. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Definitely.
I think it's probably enough chatting about the old lads.
Yeah. No, that was good.
But,
I enjoyed it. It was nice to have a look, and even just looking at the difference of Hong there, who won the European Championships last year, and that's the same guy. Like, from it's incredible to see the difference, and it shows as well how much the sport itself has improved over the last decade or whatever, you know. So
yeah, definitely some evolution. You know, again, it's hard to take away from what the guys were doing and what they achieved at the time. It was just a case of that was what was needed to be successful in that time, and the needs to be successful now are just a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be exciting to see what happens next.
Listen, great chatting with you again this morning.
Yeah, all good. So we'll see what happens next. Maybe if some people have suggestions again on where we want to take it next, whether it's a team match or an old school, new school, whatever. So if you have any suggestions, hit us up.